Welcome to Backchannel. Is it Monday? I think it feels like a Monday. Yeah, it is. It's the 7th of January, February 2022. I can't hear any tunes. Have we got any tunes playing today? That's what I was waiting for. Yeah, a little bit of. We have like a musical accompaniment that goes with this show. It's just kind of the way we do it. Look, I look like a kind of black body floating in a void here. What's going on? Why is that? Maybe it's because I'm wearing a black shirt. That'll be it. I'm Anthony Davis. This is the Anthony Davis Show. We have lots to talk about this morning, and if you'd like to join in, I'm in California here on the West Coast. You may be on the East Coast or somewhere in the middle. It's noon on the East Coast. It's 11 somewhere else. It's probably 10 somewhere as well. Who knows? But the point is that we're going to spend a couple of hours with each other. As you know, Backchannel is the only place you can listen to, watch, and chat with hosts of live shows right here on your device. And we're going to look at the government's proposed ghost gun initiative today. Also, Alison Fluke Ekron from Kansas, once known as a doe-eyed all-American girl, faces terrorism charges for allegedly a female Islamic State fighting squadron. We'll look at her case. This sounds like I'm reading a show from 2 days ago. Rewind. Maybe you can resend me that. So yeah, we'll hang on. Let me just double check that I'm reading the right show, because I'm definitely looking at today's show. Here we go. Let's start again. There we go. I think I found it. Florida's Don't Say Gay bill. That's the one I was looking for. I don't know what happened. I think my system just decided to play me a completely different episode. It says, for months, fringe groups have been knocking on doors across the country, inquiring about residents' 2020 votes. According to the Daily Beast, in New Mexico, those door knocks might be allied to a conspiracy tech group. So we'll look into this as well. And CNN reports that U.S. intel indicates Russian officers have had doubts about full-scale Ukraine invasion. We'll take another look into the conflict, as many wonder why the U.S. is so invested in this issue. And it's Black History Month, of course, so Sojourner Truth was an African-American abolitionist, women's rights activist, and author who was born into slavery. We'll take a look at her life as well. So lots to look at, lots to discuss, lots to talk about today. And hopefully you'll be able to join in. You can wake up your device if you have an Echo Show, say the word "say" and then your message. You can also send a message via this news system that we have. It's very clever. It's called Backchannel.tv. It's like a web browser. So you go to Backchannel.tv and you can message me there. And you can also watch the show on YouTube, because we live stream there as well. So lots to get through, lots to talk about. Maybe I should move this light a bit. Maybe that'll make me look a little bit less like a floating head. I'm just a floating head, aren't I? That's kind of all I am. And a little warmth as well. Look at that, a little bit of warmth. Is that better? Bit of warmth. That's all you need sometimes, isn't it? A little bit of warmth. Maybe this light should go like the other way around. I don't know. I mean, it's just experimenting, really. What about this? Is that better? Not really. There's a little light at the back here, you see, and it's supposed to kind of just like put a shape around my body, just like make me look like I'm not just a floating head, but it doesn't seem to be doing that at all. Never mind. Okay, so let's get into the morning papers as well, and if you want to message me at any time during this, then of course you're very welcome to do that. It'd be good to kind of hear you, chat with you, get to know you just a little bit. That's what Backchannel is all about. We're going to start with the Times Union this morning. They lead with Capitol Stairs repair bill, $41 million. Whoa! Governor Kathy Hochul has proposed a $41 million expenditure to repair the hallowed grand staircase on the front of the state capitol. The east-facing steps to the Capitol, which provide views looking towards the Hudson River, are set to undergo rehabilitation that could reopen the towering but disintegrating staircase that's been closed for years. This is not the US Capitol. This is obviously the New York Capitol. This is for Albany. So that's a big old job, isn't it? I mean, that's the problem with old buildings. You have to maintain them. And in fact, if you don't maintain them before they need maintaining, it costs more to maintain them. You probably know that already. But that's very much the case. Deadly drugs grip persists, it says. New York was fourth in nation for fentanyl deaths in 2021. Yes. Wow. Families Against Fentanyl, a non-profit, is dedicated to raising awareness about the drug's use, authored the study and found that fentanyl poisoning deaths are rising in numerous states, and in at least 30 states, they've doubled in the past 2 years. And celebration of a needed dose of home, Chinese families get to ring in the Year of the Tiger after the 2021 event was lost to the pandemic. Yes, of course, the Chinese New Year is upon us, and a lovely photo of children jumping around and with a Chinese dragon parading through the halls of Shaker Middle School in Latham. So there we go, that's the Times Union. It's so... I've always had a soft spot for the Chinese New Year. I don't know why that is. Why is that? I can't hear you, Carla. Say again? Yeah. Yeah? Oh, because I was born in the Year of the Tiger. What does that make me? Okay. I need to wear a red sweater as well, otherwise I'm just like a floating head. Maybe I could attach this little piece of foam to me like this and have it like a kind of happy face t-shirt. And then I kind of look like a person that isn't just, you know? What does U stand for? Undergraduate? So there it is. Okay, let's move on with the newspapers because there's so much to get through. Oh, Stacey, good morning. She can't stay very long. Okay, well, you stay as long as you can. Don't worry, I'll be here. I've got this. We're going to Auburn in New York now. AmCan declares climate emergency. American Canyon has declared a climate emergency and set the goal of net zero climate pollution by 2030. It says our work has just begun, Mayor Leon Garcia said, after the city council took action on February 1st. Net zero means reaching a balance between greenhouse gas emissions produced and greenhouse gas emissions removed from the atmosphere. Biden wants the United States economy to reach net zero by 2050. Well, I was reading about this on the weekend, and do you know something? Ventura County here in California has heated up more than anywhere else in America. It's at like something like 3.8 degrees over the 1.5 degree pre-industrial level. I mean, it is baking. Since records began, I think they started collecting records in like 1895. And it's just unbelievable. Of all the places I choose to live in the state that is heating up the most anywhere in America. But saying that, Alaska has also seen some significant heating. Crazy amounts of heating, you know? Alaska. A Biden aide says invasion could come any day. White House National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan said on Sunday that Russia could invade Ukraine any day, launching a conflict that would come at enormous human cost. Yes, the senior advisor to President Joe Biden offered another stark warning the day after U.S. officials confirmed that Russia has assembled at least 70% of the military firepower it likely intends to have in place by mid-month to give President Vladimir Putin the option of launching a full-scale invasion of Ukraine. If war breaks out, it'll come at enormous human cost to Ukraine, but we believe that based on our reparations and our response, it will preparations, sorry, not reparations. Oh, that's a slip of the tongue, isn't it? It will come at a strategic cost to Russia as well. Yeah, I mean, they've actually worked out, they've done a kind of risk assessment, and they've worked out that there is the potential for as many as 50,000 casualties if this war goes ahead. I mean, I'll be honest, Emmanuel Macron today is on his way to go and see Putin to have a conversation. He's flying there. And Macron is thinks of himself as Mr. Diplomacy. He's like a negotiator, like a hostage negotiator. So I'm kind of hoping that he's going to come up trumps. Hate using that one. Pruning contest turns 20 on the front of the Napa Valley Register. I'm reading from the Napa Valley Register now, by the way, just so you know. The Napa County pruning contest. I mean, this is what we need, right? Sometimes we can get lost in all of the insanity of a war. Sometimes it's good to bring yourself back to the fact that there is still a pruning contest going on. A 20-year-old is like the it's like the top pruner in the Napa Valley. Put on each year by the Napa Valley Farm Worker Foundation, Napa Valley Grape Growers, the pruning contest is a way for the organizations to recognize the Valley's talented vineyard crews. Well, this year's winners came from Renteria Vineyard Management and Joseph Phelps Vineyards, with Erica Lopez taking the women's title, and Casimiro Zaragoza for the men, respectively. Those who came in second, third, and fourth also were awarded, with Atlas Vineyard Management's Augustin Arias St. Superi's Hector Rodriguez and Walsh Vineyards Management Lorenzo Hernandez Aquino winning the men's category. I mean, as long as they're having a good time, because the cynic in me is like, you're making people work harder, right? Do you see what I mean? Like, these people, they prune for a living, right? By having a competition as to who can prune the fastest, as lovely as that is, the cynic in me is like, are you testing them to see if you can increase their productivity all year round? That's my fear. I hope they're being well paid. Okay, let's go on to the New York Times now. The New York Times leads with new voting maps erase competitive House seats. Gerrymandering by both parties may leave fewer than 40 districts up for grabs. Carla, do you dislike the phrase "up for grabs" as much as I do? When I used to work in the radio, they'd always write scripts for promotions with the phrase "up for grabs." So they'd say, if you want to win yourself a brand new car, we've got one up for grabs. And I would never say it. I would cross it out and I'd write something else. I find it a very, cheap... I just don't think anyone would say it in conversation. Do you know what I mean? Like, if you're chatting with someone, you wouldn't say, I went into the supermarket and they had loads of apples up for grabs. It's just like, it's not something you say. It's only something that journalists write, or the people in the sponsorship and promotions department of the various radio stations I've worked at. And I've never liked that phrase. I just find it to be really quite pedestrian. Actually, not pedestrian. That's a bad example, because pedestrians would never say up for grabs. I just don't think people talk like that. Who talks like that? And yet here on the front of the New York Times, gerrymandering by both parties may leave fewer than 40 districts up for grabs. Grabs rhymes with crabs. It says the number of competitive districts is on track to dive near and possibly below the lowest level in at least 3 decades, as Republicans and Democrats draw new political maps designed to ensure that the vast majority of House races are over before the general election starts. It says with 2/3 of the new boundaries set, mapmakers are on pace to draw fewer than 40 seats out of 435 that are considered competitive based on the 2020 presidential election results. According to a New York Times analysis of election data 10 years ago, that number was 73. Now, you know that the Democrats are trying to push through, as part of the Voting Rights Act, a ban to gerrymandering. They're trying to ban gerrymandering. That's part of the Voting Rights Act. And not a single solitary Republican voted for it. This is why. It's like, you're never going to get that through, not if it contains that kind of level of mitigation. Turning China's peaks white comes at a price. It says China did not move mountains to host the 2022 Winter Olympics, but it flooded a dried riverbed, diverted water from a key reservoir that supplies Beijing, and resettled hundreds of farmers and their families, all to feed one of the most extensive snowmaking operations in the history of the Games. Wow. They meddled with nature. It said this is what happens when the International Olympic Committee decides to bring the Winter Games to a place almost completely lacking in one of the main ingredients for winter sports: snow. What's more, Beijing and its nearby mountains did not have that much water to make the artificial kind either. Machine-made snow has played a major role in winter sports for decades, even in snowier places like Norway and Switzerland and Colorado. In Beijing, their version of the Winter Games, the competitions that began this weekend are for the first time taking place almost entirely on artificial snow. What? What is it, like polystyrene balls that you put inside an Amazon package? Necessitating an Olympic snowmaking and water management operation of enormous scale and foreshadowing the reality of snow sports everywhere as the planet warms. This is a fascinating story. On the mountains where the alpine competitions are taking place, which do not have any recreational skiing, narrow strips of white, visible from miles away, now cut through the brown. Beijing officials insist that snow production for the Games will not strain local water supplies, which have struggled to keep pace with the city's demands, but China's Herculean investments in snowmaking are part of larger efforts to turn the arid mountains near Beijing into a permanent ski and snowboard hub, a project that could face challenges as climate change upends patterns of rainfall and drought. Okay, so here's the thing, and, correct me if I'm wrong. Keith, by the way, thank you for joining us. Welcome. And Wayne as well. Welcome to Backchannel. If you've got athletes, skiers, and, snowboarders and or whatever, I don't even know what sport takes place on snow. I'm not an expert, as you can probably tell. Snow swimming or whatever it's called. But if you've got these athletes that are training all around the world for this, on snow, training on snow, to be the best at skiing on snow, and then they show up in a country for an Olympic Games where there is fake snow, are they guaranteed to be able to ski on fake snow as well as they ski on snow? And does that not complicate their entire skill set and compromise their skill set? Because, is it the same as if I learn to play the piano on an actual piano, and then when I go to do my recital, they have an electric piano? Is that the same difference? Obviously it will be the same, but different. I will have to make some slight adjustments to my style in order to make it sound as good as it would do on a piano. Is it the same with skiing? I just get the feeling that, we're kidding ourselves if we think we can make snow better than Mother Nature can make snow and think that that's okay. Because to make snow is quite a big ask. Think about, I would watch a documentary for hours on how they made enough snow to cover mountains in order for them to be able to ski. I would happily watch a 2 or 3 hour documentary on the intricacies of making artificial snow for the Winter Olympics. That is mind-blowing. Not to mention terrifying, conceptually, that's what we have to do now because of climate change. And whose idea was it to have the Olympics in Beijing if they knew in advance? The Olympics is normally decided 10 years before, or 7 or 8 years before, isn't it? So surely they must have known 7 or 8 years ago that there wasn't going to be any snow on the mountains at this time of year. Or has the planet warmed that much in the last 7 or 8 years that this has come as a surprise to everybody? These are rhetorical questions. You're welcome to. I'm sitting here waiting for an answer. Bye, Stacey. Thank you for joining us. Nice to know that you were here. But even just for 10 minutes, that's good enough for me. Thank you. Appreciate it. So the headline is "Turning China's Peaks White Comes at a Price. Olympic snowmaking relies on the water used by Beijing." At least they use water when they make snow. That would have been worrying if they kind of had some other method. School masks will come off in New Jersey. Governor Philip D. Murphy of New Jersey, a Democrat who's imposed some of the nation's most stringent pandemic-related mandates, will no longer require students and school employees to wear masks, signaling a deliberate shift toward treating the coronavirus as a part of daily life. Mr. Murphy, the vice chairman of the National Governors Association, said on Sunday that he would officially announce the elimination of the mandate on Monday afternoon. The new policy will take effect after the second week of March, 2 years after New York and New Jersey became early epicenters of a virus that has since mutated and killed more than 900,000 people across the US. Also, a photograph of a potential US Supreme Court nominee. I think she's like in the top 2 favorites. It says in 2014, when then Governor Jerry Brown of California nominated Leondra R. Kruger to the California Supreme Court, the immediate reaction in her home state was, Leondra who? So offensive. She was just 38, but while she was born and brought up in California, her career had been in Washington, D.C. as a government lawyer. A retired veteran of the state appellate bench complained that her nomination was a slap in the face because she had never been a judge at any level. Willie Brown, a former mayor of San Francisco, asked the San Francisco Chronicle why the governor had to go all the way to the East Coast for a new justice. Were there no qualified African Americans in California, wrote the mayor, who is African American. Within weeks, however, Justice Kruger was unanimously confirmed. The hearing was so deferential and swift that the court's Chief Justice was still asking who was in favor when the confirmation panel, which included the state's then Attorney General Kamala Harris, interrupted with aye votes. 8 years later, she's forged a reputation as one of the most influential voices on the highest court in the nation's most populous state. They say it's an achievement that now could prove as consequential as any Beltway credential. If selected from President Biden's shortlist of candidates to succeed Justice Stephen G. Breyer on the Supreme Court, she could become not only the first black female justice, but also a mediating force on an institution notable for its polarization. Well, I'm all for it. I mean, I don't really know. I can only assume that Biden is doing his due diligence. She sounds great to me. Give her the job. Also, Macron takes diplomatic lead in bid to defuse Russia conflict. It says the standoff with Russia over Ukraine enters a critical phase this week. The United States has snapped NATO to attention and moves forces east. Moscow has readied still more forces on the Ukrainian border, but beneath those tensions, diplomatic avenues are being feverishly explored, and the outlines of potential solutions still amorphous may be taking form. The photo of Macron. Macron is like, he really looks the part. He's like, because he's aged a little now, and he's kind of growing into himself. He looked like a bit of a child when he first started, but he seems to be like becoming a bit of an elder statesman. Not as much of an elder statesman as his wife, who's like 25 years older than him. Like 25 years older. It's quite amazing. She'll probably want to dump him soon because he looks too old. She'll be like, get me another guy who looks 21. This guy's starting to look 35. Anxiety over climate change lands on the therapist's couch. This is interesting. It says it would hit Alina Black in the snack aisle at Trader Joe's, a wave of guilt and shame that made her skin crawl. Something as simple as nuts. They came wrapped in plastic, often in layers of it. That she imagined leaving her house and traveling to a landfill where it would remain through her lifetime and the lifetime of her children. She really longs to make less of a mark on the earth. But she'd also had a baby in diapers, a full-time job, a 5-year-old who wanted snacks. At the age of 37, these conflicting forces were slowly closing on her, like a set of jaws. In the early morning hours, after nursing the baby, she would slip down a rabbit hole, scrolling through news reports of droughts, fires, mass extinction, and then would stare into the dark. It was for this reason that around 6 months ago she searched climate anxiety and pulled up the name of Thomas J. Doherty, a Portland psychologist who specializes in climate. This is interesting. They're basically saying that, people are so worried about the changing climate that it's affecting their own personal anxiety on a day-to-day basis. I mean, it definitely affects mine. I think about it a lot. Well, for younger people, I can imagine it's probably more prevalent because, of course, they're going to have to deal with the consequences. You know, if you're over the age of like 50, well, it's not really, actually not 50, that's not fair because they say that, you know, we've only got 7 or 8 years. So if you're over the age of like 75, then it might be a problem. But for everybody else, it's everyone's problem. I've really decided, Carla, that I'm keeping my car forever. I want you to know this because I know you criticize me for like having multiple electric vehicles, but I'm keeping my car forever. I have no reason to change it or sell it or anything. It's a wonderful car. I bought it secondhand, 3 years old. It's a fully electric vehicle. It's going to last me the rest of my life. I have no reason to change it. I was looking into other ones and I realized that the newer ones that I like the look of, they're too big. They're just huge. I can't imagine driving a car that's that big. I find it offensive. My car is really small. It doesn't even fit 5 people. It's a 4-seater. It doesn't have 3 seats in the back like most cars. It has 2 seats in the back. There's a cup holder in the middle. No one can sit in that. I mean, you know, this is a big part of it, isn't it? You know, it's like being conscious of not being in that ever-evolving machine. And in fact, leasing, which is the way that people buy cars here in certainly in California, but I'm sure elsewhere, is entirely wasteful if you think about it. Because when you get that car, you know that you're only going to keep it for 2 to 3 years. Like, that's the deal. You're signing up to only keep it for 2 to 3 years. And then the car is like cascaded, you know? So that's the New York Times this morning. Keith has come back again. Hi, Keith. Welcome. Let's go to the Times reporter this time for Ohio. Fun in the snow is the headline. 9-year-old Raven Coventry and Dylan Meg of Dover enjoy the sledding at Dees Hills Park on Friday. There's a lot of snow in Ohio. I'm aware of this. Pandemic is tough on people with disabilities. Excuse me, is the headline. It says Cara Pritchett lights up when she talks about family members who have helped her navigate life with cerebral palsy during the COVID-19 pandemic. The oldest of 4 siblings, she's 25. She was diagnosed with a mild form of cerebral palsy shortly after being born. Yeah, I mean, I do think about this, how it's hard enough for people with disabilities to get out and experience, you know, a kind of interactive life when there's not a pandemic, you know, for multiple reasons. But with a pandemic, it's like, it's hard enough if you're able-bodied. Next up, let's move on because there's not much on the front of the Ohio Times reporter this morning. Let's go to the Chronicle Telegram for Ohio. We'll stay in Ohio. We'll just see if they've got more to offer this morning. The Chronicle says invasion could happen at any time. Yes, this is a repeat of that story about the US predicting that Russia could seize Kiev in days. Diplomatic efforts set to intensify this week. I wonder what Emmanuel Macron's got up his sleeve. Because, you know, some people say that the only reason he's doing this is because there's elections coming up. There's elections coming up in Poland and France and various places, Belarus, I think, and the idea of like going in there and just trying to delay this is more preferable. Just like delay this. No one wants to be at war when there's an election. Even Putin. Cream of the crop on, well, actually, it doesn't really matter in Russia because even if you vote against Putin, you still get a vote for Putin. Gold winners work to advances to the national finals in New York City. This is a group of 51 local student artists recognized for excellence as part of the Lorain County Regional Scholastic Art Exhibition Gold Key program. Wow, that's a mouthful, isn't it? And it's a lovely photograph of the art on the walls. I mean, we do forget this. I was thinking about this during Trump's tenure. You know, Trump had a total disdain for the arts, and that's a very famous part of the authoritarian's playbook. Are you aware of that, Carla? It's like on a list of things that the authoritarian does away with, and the arts is one of them, because you don't want people to appreciate common interest. So it's the first thing to go, and that's right. Yeah. Pol Pot executed people who wore glasses. No hope for me. But you'll notice that during Trump's 4-year tenure, never was there anything arts-related mentioned. Ever. Nothing celebrated, nothing applauded. He never went to see anything. Well, yeah, a lot of the artists weren't prepared to kind of have him present. But the point is that he had always a inbuilt disdain for the arts. And so it's just very interesting to me that this is part of the authoritarian's playbook, is that, and Hitler was very famous for this as well. Like anything that is considered to be a kind of auxiliary, frivolous, bolt-on, recreational, artistic, forget it. Cultural. I think there's probably a lot of, cultural issues associated with this. Do you remember when he sent Mike Pence to go and see Hamilton? That was great. Yeah, and Pence went to see Hamilton on Broadway, and obviously they were very unhappy about this because, and I'm sure Pence, who is the whitest man in America, was very unhappy seeing the founding fathers portrayed by African-American men, which is just wonderful. And at the end, one of the actors of the show came forward and made a speech to Pence about freedom, voting rights, race. I don't know if they mentioned abortion or not. I can't remember. And Pence walked out. Yeah. Pence, is a bit of a hero at the moment, isn't he, for like standing up to Trump? Which I'm not really supportive of, because he didn't stand up to him for 4 years. He stood up to him like literally on the last day of the 4th year. But I do see some benefit to granting him a free pass over the insurrection, and because he was obviously involved in the coup attempt, the coup plan. He just didn't go through with it. But they're saying that he should be given amnesty if he talks. Love to see him on the stand, like bad-mouthing his former colleagues. It'll be so interesting. He is a remarkable person, Pence. He really has the ability to fake no emotions. So he has no emotions, and then when he makes a speech about something that is, emotional, he fakes with no emotion. So it's like he tries to show empathy, but because his face doesn't move, because of all the Botox and the fillers, or whatever, he just... You can see him acting. You can see him acting out. And yet, it still is emotionless. It's very interesting. Analysis on the front of the Chronicle Telegraph, how redistricting is taking the swing out of swing states. It says the Ohio Supreme Court invalidated the state's congressional map on January 14, ruling that it unconstitutionally favored Republicans. It's ordered the Ohio legislature to pass a new map in 30 days. Yes, it says Democratic and Republican state legislatures have put the competitive congressional district on the endangered species list, bolstering the GOP advantage in this year's midterm elections, but also setting up an even more polarized Congress next year. There are just 13 toss-up seats out of the 269 districts in redistricting completed so far, according to ratings from the nonpartisan Cook Political Report. So there we are. There we are. Let's stay in Ohio, go to the Lima News. I do love a Lima. Oh, it's a good one, is it? Okay, let's find out. Let's find out what's happening in the Lima News this morning. Garrett A. Morgan, Cleveland's Black Edison, inventor, created today's traffic light and gas mask. What? I had no idea that the person that invented the traffic light also invented the gas mask. It says it was a steamy July night in 1916, when just before midnight, a gas pocket exploded 120 feet beneath the surface of Lake Erie. I've been to Lake Erie. See, I feel it. I get it. The explosion ripped through the 10-foot wide underwater tunnel that was being built to pull fresh drinking water for Cleveland from 5 miles out in the lake, away from the polluted shoreline. The blast left 11 tunnel workers dead and a plume of noxious smoke coming from the rubble. 2 rescue parties were dispatched to search for survivors, but 11 of the 18 rescuers were soon overcome by carbon monoxide gas. Desperate to save anyone still alive, Cleveland police placed a call to Garrett Morgan, a local inventor who called himself the Black Edison. Morgan had patented a breathing device 2 years earlier. He and his brother Frank donned what Morgan called the safety hood, entered the tunnel, and pulled the survivors to safety. But the following day, accounts in the New York Times, Chicago Tribune, and Los Angeles Times failed to mention his involvement. Morgan would spend the rest of his life fighting for recognition of his work. He was born in 1877 in Kentucky. His father was the mixed-race son of Confederate General John Hunt Morgan and an enslaved black woman. His mother, half black and half Native American, was the daughter of a Baptist minister. He had attended school only through 6th grade. As a teen, Morgan moved to Cincinnati, where he worked as an apprentice handyman and taught himself how mechanical things worked. He arrived penniless in Cleveland 2 years later and found work repairing and building sewing machines for a clothing manufacturer. In 1907, he opened his own sewing machine and tailoring business. I mean, this guy's amazing. So in 1914, he basically got a patent for the gas mask that he invented. But was it like a hood? It was not like a traditional gas mask. It seems to say that it's like a hood. Interesting. Wonderful. Most Great Lakes won't approach record highs. This is, still in Ohio. It says most of the Great Lakes will remain above their long-term average water levels in the coming months, but won't reach the record highs of recent years. Army Corps of Engineers hydrologists said on their latest forecast. We're well below the record high levels we experienced in 2019 and 2020. Our forecast does not show the likelihood of any of the lakes really approaching those record highs again over the next 6 months. Interesting. And then a photograph of U.S. troops arriving in Poland. A few dozen elite U.S. troops and equipment were seen landing Sunday in southeastern Poland near the border with Ukraine, following Joe Biden's orders to deploy 1,700 soldiers amid a fear of Russian invasion of Ukraine. Hundreds more infantry troops of the 82nd Airborne Division are still expected to arrive at the airport, about 56 miles from Poland's border with Ukraine. A U.S. Army Boeing C-17 Globemaster plane brought a few dozen troops and vehicles. Can you imagine? I mean, I just can't imagine it, the idea of working in the military or being in the military. It's just not in my wheelhouse at all. But being, not in active war and being, I think they were in Fort Bragg, these people, these soldiers, and to know that you're being sent to war, not an active war, not a war that's already happening, but a war that might happen. I think that must be very, psychologically perplexing. Because it's like, are we going to live? Are we going to die? Are we going to go home and never get to fight and serve? Because I guess you have to psych yourself up. And they're currently being sent out there, but they're psyching themselves up for something that's not happening yet. Different to being sent to war if the war has been raging for 4 years, or 5 years, or 6 years. Being sent to a potential conflict that is currently hanging in the balance through, diplomatic efforts. It's all resting on Emmanuel Macron. I I said, oh, Doug, hi, Doug. Andrea, hi. Thank you for joining us. Andrea's in Florida. Doug's in Ohio, hence why we're having this conversation. Don't worry, Doug. We've got you. We've got you. So that was the Lehman news this morning. And just a reminder that Backchannel has a growing list of shows, including Haley and Allison live, waking you up in the morning with lots of laughs, and their one-star cinema review. Live Every Day with Liv Harrison, live from Texas, celebrating the little things in life with plenty of coffee. And also the charming and funny Hal Rudnick, that's your pal Hal. He's here in about an hour and a quarter's time with your pal Hal. That's the name of the show. I'm Anthony Davis. This is Backchannel. This is the Anthony Davis Show. We are discussing, we're looking through the morning papers right now. And you're welcome to get involved. You can wake up your Echo show, then say the word say, and then your message. Say it out loud. It'll just come through to me. You can also follow the show on YouTube and comment and message at backchannel.tv. Okay, to Florida now. We like to hang around in Florida. Sheriff Zoo want new law after Eco's death. Well, I'm not surprised. We've been following the story of Eco. Do you remember? This is after the cleaner stuck his arm through. They bit the arm off. They amputated the arm. Then they shot the tiger. They should have shot the man and left the tiger. Men are not endangered, right? Which one are you going to pick? It says a month after Eco the tiger was shot and killed, his life's impact continues beyond more than 40,000 raised for a conservation fund in his honor. The big cat's death may eventually lead to new laws. Many were stunned when the Collier County Sheriff's Office said on Friday it wouldn't press charges against River Ruquinist, whose actions got the big cat shot and killed. The problem? No laws apply to what he did. If we could have, we would have, read his office's Facebook post announcing the news. Oh, what? So there's no law against shooting a tiger. It was on the December 29th. Rosenquist ditched his bike and made it past barriers to Eco's cage in the Naples Zoo, where he worked as an after-hours cleaning crew. He stuck his arm through the mesh, and the tiger grabbed it, not letting go until a deputy fired at the cat point blank. Eco retreated to the back of his enclosure and died from internal bleeding. Oh, man. The 26-year-old is still hospitalized in a stable condition. Isn't it crazy that you can have your arm bitten off and you don't die? Do you know what I mean? It's like, what happened to you? Oh, I got my arm bitten off by a tiger. And you're okay. Yeah, I'm fine. Yeah, just don't have an arm. I mean, just conceptually, there are certain bits of the human, if you bite them off, like a head, you're probably going to die. Not the arm, it seems. 2 arms, 2 potential tiger bites. Cases, hospital says, stays decline in SWFL, Southwest Florida. It says cases and hospitalizations continue to fall in Lee and Collier counties. Signs that the Omicron variant surge has likely past its peak. New reported cases in both counties sharply declined for a 3rd consecutive week, according to a report released on Friday by the Florida Department of Health. That's good news. Good news. And also, Florida's Don't Say Gay bill raises concerns amongst the LGBTQ community. A photograph of Jennifer Koslow says her son started to feel sad in 4th grade. He didn't know why. He couldn't find the words to describe how he felt. Assigned female at birth when classes were separate by boys and girls for sex education lessons. Things didn't feel right to him. Eventually, he spoke to his friends at school about his gender identity. His parents contacted school administrators, who offered support and looped in his 6 middle school teachers. By 8th grade, he officially changed his pronouns to he, him with Leon County schools. A new potential state law, however, would have changed the trajectory of her son's happiness. A bill nicknamed Don't Say Gay by critics is moving through the Florida legislature and could become law this summer. I mean, look, this is I think I've said this before, but I'll just say it again briefly. You know, it is a miracle that us humans are successfully birthed and born. Hi, Sandy. And capable of anything. Do you know what I mean? Like the risk. I had this with my children. You know, both my children at birth went into intensive care. And I'm like, wow, we've just been through like 10 months of gestation for a child to come out and it be so ill that it can't survive in the world and it has to go into an incubator. So I know, like, and also during a pregnancy, of course, there's multiple opportunities for risk. You know, you have ongoing tests. In America, they test every month. In England, they test like, you know, at 3 months and then again at like 9 months. But because they make money here, you see, every time they test a woman during a pregnancy, there's the dollars being made. So it's a slightly different service. But my point is that I find it to be a miracle that a human can be born with 2 arms and 2 legs and a head and eyes that work and a tongue that works and ears that work. Like, if you manage to get a child that is fully healthy, it's a miracle. Brain development, it's a miracle that it works. Is it any wonder that some humans will be slightly different to other humans, and not all humans are going to be exactly the same? If you consider how many variables, how many atoms are being split, genes are being formed, and it just cells rather than atoms. Cells are being split. You know, it drives me crazy that people think that there should be this like perfection, this level of perfection where everybody is straight and everybody is white and everybody doesn't have standard male pattern baldness, and where everybody has the same kind of sexual identity or gender, or it's offensive. Humanity is so imperfect. Otherwise, we would all just be like clones of each other. Jeff, welcome. We'll talk about this in a little while. But it's just my experience is that the imperfection of humanity is what drives our differences, and is what therefore needs to be supported and celebrated. And if a person is born in the wrong body, they have a female brain and a male body, that is just one of those things that happens to humans. It's not specific to the LGBT community, it's specific to humans. Humans are imperfect. We cannot all be the same. And so to have a policy in place that does not support people who were born in the wrong gender, it's just beggars belief. We know so much about it now. You know, 2 of my best friends from very early on, for the age of 18, were both transgender. So I have a lot of experience, like growing up around transgender people. And they never had a choice. You don't choose to be transgender when you're 18. You don't choose. In the same way that you don't choose to be straight, or you don't choose to be white, or you don't choose to be black, or you don't choose to be bald. You know? There's a great line in Curb Your Enthusiasm where one of Larry's friends says to him, you know, pray for my father who's dying. And he's like, I'm not going to pray. And he's like, why wouldn't you pray for my father? And he's like, no, I'm not really into prayer. And the guy's like, what? I mean, why wouldn't you pray? It's like, you know, if you pray, then it's helpful. And he's like, prayers don't work. And he's like, what do you mean prayers don't work? And he goes, I'm bald. And I think it's kind of an interesting perspective on on faith and belief systems generally. I'm bald. Okay, let's move on with the newspapers. Jeff's with us now. Sandy, Andrea, Keith, Wayne. Thank you for hanging out with Backchannel on this Monday morning. It's the 7th of February. Wow, time went so fast. So fast. Did we do the Naples Daily News? Yes, we did. We just did it a little bit earlier. That's all. So should we look at this? Should we look at the Florida Don't Say Gay bill in a bit more detail here? I think we should. We're like 8 minutes ahead of schedule, but I think we can do it. I think now would be a good time. So the bill basically is aimed at banning teachers from discussing sexual orientation or gender identity in their classrooms, but it's the speech rights of students that the proposed legislation could infringe on. Yes, Parental Rights in Education Bill, dubbed the Don't Say Gay Bill by critics, would prohibit school districts from encouraging classroom discussion about sexual orientation or gender identity in primary grade levels, or in a manner that is not age appropriate or developmentally appropriate for students. I mean, the thing is that already happens. Teachers are very trustworthy. They are trained to be teachers. When did parents know better than teachers? When did that happen? It used to be the case that your parents would send you to school and just trust that the teachers knew what they were doing. And now it's like, no, teachers don't know anything. While the courts have typically given great deference to educators in regards to curriculum matters, allowing teachers over lawmakers to decide which techniques or subjects are appropriate for the classroom, this particular bill represents a slightly different issue, because public school teachers are government employees who are paid to deliver the curriculum that's been assigned to them. It would be a tough legal challenge for an individual teacher to bring against the state legislature. However, if the legislation takes effect in June, it could prompt parents of students to take legal action should they feel like such a law would prevent their child from exercising their freedom of speech at school. The Supreme Court has made it clear that public school students at all age levels possess First Amendment rights, according to a law professor at the University of Florida. He said if students just talking about his or her sexual orientation or sexual identity as part of their own speech and not as part of the curriculum, the school is going to have to show that the speech causes substantial and material disruption of the educational atmosphere. Say you've got students who want to talk about LGBT issues, and now you can't encourage it, you shut it down, he said. That's problematic. I mean, this was actually ruled against in 1969 in the Supreme Court. It held that schools should not shut down student speech without passing the substantial disruption test established in the landmark case Tinker versus Des Moines Independent Community School. A teacher in a hypothetical situation, a teacher in Florida were to shut down a discussion about a sexual orientation or sexual identity that was raised by a student, they could be sued by the student unless they could prove that the speech substantially interfered with the operation of their class. I mean, this is all such a waste of time. It's just such a waste of time. It's a waste of effort and energy and money. And lawyers are going to get rich and people are going to get poor and education is going to suffer because none of this stuff happens in class. This is all in this like critical race theory. It's all in the mind of these increasingly extremist parents who are trying to solve a problem that doesn't, what's the phrase? They're trying to solve a problem that doesn't exist. The problem doesn't exist. It's never been a problem. We had no sex education in school at all. None. We had no kind of gender discussion, just didn't happen. They expected parents. When I was a kid, they expected parents. And when my father first told me about the birds and the bees, a bee stung me and I thought I was pregnant. Anyway, I just feel that we're living in the weirdest time, where people there's so much wrong in the world. This whole subsection of debate is just so unnecessary. And what's it based on? It's just based on fear and control. And fundamentally, are parents worried that their kids might accidentally become gay or transgender because these conversations are being had? Is that what they fear? That if you're exposed to it, then you might want to try it. And God forbid we should have a gay or transgender person in our family. That's what this is. It's fear. Because they have a fundamental prejudice against people who are not the same as them. white, God-fearing, and, I don't know, straight and a little bit racist. I mean, what else is it? It's prejudice. It's just prejudice. But banning the books and not wanting to talk about it and it's just prejudice. And the whole point of humanity evolving and us getting smarter and stronger as a race is also being more open, understanding about different types of people, and knowing that no one is going to eat you. That's the fear, isn't it? We don't eat each other. This week, the Texas governor, Greg Abbott, introduced a parental bill of rights, which would amend the state's constitution to reinforce that parents are the primary decision makers in all matters involving their children. In Virginia, Governor Glenn Youngkin set up a tip line for the public to report teachers who are being inherently divisive. How do the parents know? How do the parents know that teachers are being inherently divisive? How do the parents know? The parents go into class? Because what you're doing now is you're relying on the children telling the parents. And when the children work out that they have the power to have a teacher fired if they say something about the teacher's conduct in class, they're all going to do it. They're going to get off on the power. And so they'll say anything. So any conversation about race will be reported to parents, because parents will have told their children, if your teacher says anything about race or gender or sexuality, you tell mama. And then mama will hear, obviously, every day, because these things are, part of our humanity. And mama will make the phone call, and then the public will get the teacher fired. This is going to be a disaster. And you know what the knock-on effect is of this? People won't want to go into the teaching profession. And then we won't have enough teachers. And then the only teachers we'll be able to get will be bad teachers, or inexperienced teachers, or untrained teachers. Because teachers will not want to teach if they're in an environment where they are constantly being watched and tested. And that's the tragedy, because teaching is the best profession in the world. There is no better profession than teaching. It's a shame it's not particularly well paid, and it's a shame that it's such hard work. But it's such a great job. We remember our teachers from childhood throughout our entire lives. Our teachers influence us throughout our entire lives. And isn't it crazy that you can't remember half the people you met when you were 7 or 8 or 9 or 10 or 11 or 12, but you can remember the name of every teacher? Because they impact us, and they're with us during our most crucial developmental days. So this is just going to backfire. And these parents who think that they're winning because they're stamping out this vile language are going to find that they'll have no teachers left. And then what are they going to do? They have to homeschool their kids. I've actually thought about homeschooling a lot. I mean, I did a bit of homeschooling during the pandemic, obviously. But I think that it's very hard. I mean, it's very easy to homeschool in California. They make it very easy for you. It's a very, there's not a huge amount of complexity to it. But I also love the fact that kids socialize, I mean, I'm not really a huge supporter of school for academic purposes. I'm more of a supporter of school for socialization purposes, and also learning how to respect authority. Because if you're going to go into a job, you need to respect authority. And It's nice to have some rules that aren't just in the home, rules at school. I think rules are quite helpful for development. And I've always been with my kids, I've always been very militant in terms of like bath time, bedtime, brush your teeth time, breakfast time, lunch time. Like routine is the thing that has made my children such a joy to bring up. But it's because I've sacrificed my own social life and my own personal activities because I've wanted my kids to have this really rather kind of militant upbringing. Not in terms of discipline, just in terms of the clock, So, like, I would never, sometimes I see parents take their children out in the evenings. Like, their parents have been invited to another couple for dinner or something, and they just bring the kids. I would never do that. The kids have to be in bed at 7:30. Like, they have to be in bed at 7:30. So I don't go out. You make it work. And my brother doesn't understand it. He's like, why don't you just bring the kids? I'm not like, because if I bring the kids and they go to bed at 9:30 or 10, that's going to have a knock-on effect for me for the rest of the week. You have to be militant with it. And that's how you potty train, and that's how all of these things happen, You instill this routine. And it's very cute. My 3-year-old boy, goes and has a wee before he gets in the bath every day. And it's like, I don't tell him to. He just knows that, before you get in the bath, you go to the toilet. Super cute. So, I just worry that we're living in a time where, in some states, not all states, teachers are going to fall foul of this new anti-teaching brigade. It's like parents are against their own. Parents and teachers are supposed to be on the same side. They're the goodies. The kids are the baddies. What they've done is they've aligned the kids with the parents as the goodies and made the teacher the baddie. It's the wrong way round. The parent should side with the teacher every time to maintain respect and authority. I've never really understood how, some parents think that they're, friends with their kids. It's not good to be, friends with your kids. I don't think. Be their parent. Parent them. But don't, and of course, be open and have complete two-way and all that connection. But, you still need to maintain that kind of respect. Because children need boundaries. They need to know that this is the parent, this is the teacher. And my child, says out loud sometimes, "You're not the boss of me," she says. And I say, "Oh, yes, I am." It's important. My parents were not strict with me because they didn't need to be, because I was a nerd. I was just a nerd. They had nothing to worry about. Nothing to worry about at all. Okay, where are we at? Let's see where we're at here with the old subject matter. Let's get back on the running order, I'm kind of interested in, if you have a view on this, please let me know. Elizabeth has joined us. Hello, Elizabeth. Welcome from South Dakota. Jeff's with us as well. Landon has joined. Landon, thank you. Nice to know you're part of the show. Sandy as well. What a wonderful team, little troop we have here. Last week, Chasten Buttigieg, who's the husband of the Transport Secretary Pete Buttigieg, he accused lawmakers of purposely making Florida a harder place for LGBT kids to survive in. I don't think this is really about parents' rights. Parents' rights to do what? To tell LGBT kids that they don't belong? To push LGBT families away and into the closet, Buttigieg said. The bill in Florida is the latest development in an intensifying debate over what should be taught in public schools. Greg Abbott introduced the Parental Bill of Rights, which would amend the state's constitution to reinforce that parents are the primary decision makers. What about school boards? Again, it's like everything is becoming politicized. Everything. From the pandemic, voting rights, I mean, you would have thought that all political persuasions would want everyone to vote. Everyone. At any opportunity. And make it really easy. And yet you have the entire Republican Party voting down the Voting Rights Act. I mean, it just speaks volumes. Like, how obvious does it need to be for people to realize that we're now in a very unsafe position politically, because democracy is just an irrelevant part of the future. It's just not, it's irrelevant. I mean, I hope that it backfires on them. It already is with some of this redistricting. Oh yeah, let's do the Volley News Update. This is a podcast that I do every day. It's a chance for you to kind of hear what's happening across the United States in just 2 minutes, in a little bit of a sad voice today, apparently. But anyway, here it is. Let's have a listen.
It's Monday, February 7. From the Volley Network, this is your daily US news update. I'm Anthony Davis. Mike Pence's former chief of staff, Mark Short, joined several senior Republicans in rallying to defend the former vice president on Sunday in his escalating feud with Donald Trump over the legitimacy of the 2020 presidential election. Some of Trump's advisors on the election were like snake oil salesmen, Short said on Sunday. Pence angered the former president this week by rejecting Trump's false claim that he had the power to overturn Joe Biden's victory by refusing to accept results from 7 contested states. At a conference hosted by the Conservative Federalist Society in Florida on Friday, Pence delivered his strongest rebuke to date of Trump's election lies, declaring that it was un-American to believe that any one person had the right to choose the president. On Sunday, Short and Republican Senators John Barrasso, Lisa Murkowski and Marco Rubio were among senior figures who backed Pence's position, adding their voices to a backlash by other prominent Republican figures apparently growing weary of Trump's continued obsession with his election defeat and subversion of democracy. Pence, as president of the U.S. Senate, certified Biden's victory in the early morning of January 7, 2021, hours after a mob incited by the defeated president launched a deadly insurrection on the U.S. Capitol. Alaska Republican Murkowski is among the supporters of an aggressive bipartisan effort in Congress criticized by Trump to overhaul the 1887 Election Count Act and enshrine in statute that a vice president has no role in deciding a presidential election. Your daily US news update is part of the Volley Network. To hear my live daily morning show, ask your Amazon Echo device to open Backchannel.
And we're back in business. There we go. That was actually surprisingly smooth today. That was probably the first time that the US news update was not staccato. Love it. I don't know what changed. Welcome to Backchannel. I'm Anthony Davis. It's the 7th of February, 2022. We are working our way through the morning papers, but also we have some discussions that are going on, talking about just some of the main issues that are really catching our attention. The Don't Say Gay bill aimed at Florida teachers, which may violate students' rights to free speech. Landon and Andrea and Jeff and Sandy and Keith and Wayne are with us, and hang on in there. Doug as well. Hello, Doug in Ohio. So if you want to message me at any time, you can do that. You just have to go to backchannel.tv or wake up your Echo show and chat to me in through the magic of the Echo device. So let's move on now, because we've got lots to get through. We want to look at the pro-Trump county carrying out a wild audit of its own 2020 votes. Yes, for months, fringe groups have been knocking on doors across the country, inquiring about residents' 2020 votes. But in Otero County, New Mexico, those door knocks might soon come as part of a nearly $50,000 contract between the county, a conspiracy peddling tech group, and even a further right Telegram channel. Yes, Otero County is a Republican stronghold in New Mexico. More than 60% of Otero voters cast ballots for Donald Trump in 2020, in contrast to the state's pro-Biden majority. That hasn't stopped some locals, chiefly an Otero County commissioner, currently facing charges related to the January 6th Capitol attack, from calling for an audit into the county's vote. I mean, this is the tragedy of this, isn't it? That it's like they just can't accept that they lost. It's all it is. You lost. There was no fraud. And so, but the problem is that they will continue to do this as long as the former president keeps saying out loud, "We won. Frankly, we did win the election," he says. It's a lie. A few months ago, 2 women showed up at Steve Snell's home in southern Pennsylvania with questions for his 89-year-old mother-in-law. They said they was with something called the Committee to Verify the Election or something like that. Something I'd never heard of, said Snell, a retiree and former Democrat candidate for the state legislature. More than a year after the election, reports of door-to-door canvassing have surfaced across the country, from battleground states such as Pennsylvania, Michigan, and Florida to solidly red Utah. An Ohio scientist popular in circles, associated with former President Donald Trump, recently told a Wisconsin legislative committee that he's already trained canvassing teams in 30 states. These so-called citizen canvassers are the latest twist in the efforts by Trump's supporters and, to advance claims pushed by the former president himself that he lost the 2020 election through voter fraud. Federal, state, and location officials have all said there is no evidence of fraud that would have affected the outcome of the election. Snell said that the women, in their quest to uncover voter fraud, wanted to know whether his mother-in-law had indeed cast a ballot in the 2020 election. She had, but she didn't so from his address, having moved from her assisted living facility to his family's home during the pandemic. They were looking for something that didn't exist, Snell said this week. It's an example from my perspective of the crazy, illogical things that people believe because this man at the top, Donald Trump, said it was so. The door-to-door activity has raised alarms for some state and local election supervisors and for voting rights advocates who fear it could confuse voters or even worse, veer into voter intimidation. As attempts to audit the 2020 election results have stalled or failed to produce the optics election deniers have sought, they have changed their tactics, said Matthew Masterson, a former senior cybersecurity advisor with the Department of Homeland Security, who worked on election security issues. He now studies election misinformation as a policy fellow with the Stanford Internet Observatory. The canvassing approach, he said, moves the harassment to the streets of neighborhoods. Hannah Fried, who's a voting rights activist, served as national campaign director of All Voting, is local, said home visits from people who don't believe the 2020 election results could be really spooky for voters. What other message can a person take from that other than your vote is not welcome, she said. I don't know why Biden doesn't make an address to the nation from the Oval Office and talk about this stuff. You know, I personally think that this stuff is so serious. It has so much potential danger and compromise for American democracy that Biden should be doing a serious speech from the Oval Office that is broadcast into every home, and it's taken on every network. You're not even allowed to hide from it, like it interrupts programming. And he explains all of the tactics that are currently in place by this shadow government. Because Trump's basically running a shadow government, isn't he? You've got half the population, almost half, who claim that he is still the president because he says he is. I mean, it's really serious, and I just don't know that Biden's approach of ignoring it is the right approach. I mean, maybe... Because the problem is, unless you nip it in the bud, this stuff will keep happening. Wiley, hello. First time from Rossi. Welcome. Great to see you. Thank you for joining Backchannel on this Monday morning. In Florida, the reports of door knocking prompted Pasco County Supervisor elections at Brian Corley, a Republican, to release a public statement clarifying that county employees were not involved in the effort. They say there's no indication that Trump is working to organize the canvassing, but he has cheered on the efforts. In a statement, Liz Harrington, Trump's spokeswoman, said President Trump supports cleaning up voter registration rolls and rooting out voter fraud. If we do not have secure elections, we no longer have a constitutional republic. I mean, he is just projecting. Not doing anything. He's just projecting this concept of voter fraud that doesn't exist. It's straight out of the authoritarian's playbook. She said that patriots looking to root out fraud should be applauded for doing the work politicians don't do to ensure our elections are free and fair. That's a lie. Trump recently cited a Republican candidate's door-knocking efforts in the Detroit area as part of his endorsement for her bid for a state legislative seat. He said Jackie Eubanks has taken it upon herself to go out and document voter fraud, Trump said. This courageous young woman went door to door in Macomb County and Detroit asking voters if they really voted. And she's finding further proof of the rampant election fraud in 2020. No, she's not. She isn't. It's a lie. They lost. I mean, they just can't accept that they lost. Trump is such a bad loser. And for over a year leading up to the election, when he was interviewed and they said, if you lose, will you accept the results? His answer was, we'll have to see. And no one did anything about that. No one did anything about it. We'll have to see. We'll have to see means, if I lose, I won't accept it. That's what we'll have to see means. A key figure in the door-to-door canvassing push, Ohio scientist Douglas Frank, said the effort is rapidly spreading. Frank, who has gained prominence in Trump world with his theories about a stolen election, says he has trained teams in 30 states so far on how to examine their voting rolls to uncover potential fraud, and more have asked for help. It's part of his claim that state voter registration rolls have been inflated with fraudulent or phantom voters. Frank, who's on sabbatical from his job teaching math and science at a K-12 private school in the Cincinnati area, has gained notoriety for his election fraud theories. He appeared on stage earlier this year at a Trump rally in Lorain County, but a review of Michigan's 2020 elections, led by Republican state lawmakers, described Frank's conclusions as not sound. So basically, it's just lies by proxy. Trump at the top goes, the election was fraudulent, has no evidence, loses 61 court cases regarding this. All of the court cases, like all of the court cases. So then he sends his minions to go and whip up stuff, whip it up in the hope of finding something. Of course, they're not going to find anything, but just the by nature of whipping it up, that in itself is going to continue the controversy, and it'll make it seem like it's still a thing when it was never a thing. The goal of canvassing is to deliver evidence of fraudulent voting to state and local election officials to prompt further investigation. This is growing. It's not going away. It's increasing. The end game, Frank said, is for people to understand their elections aren't real anymore. They are being manipulated. And this is what Putin or any of these autocrats do, is that they sow the seeds of doubt that elections are unsafe. They sow the seeds of doubt. Because that's all helpful in the autocrat's playbook. For people to doubt that their vote really matters, because they don't want people to vote. The fewer people vote, the more the control they have. And that's my fear. I mean, this could backfire. Think about this for a second, because Democrats are really have become quite well versed in election fraud now. As in the election fraud that's happening now, because what's going on here is election fraud. There wasn't election fraud in the election, But what's going on now by these Republicans is election fraud. Sowing doubt in the elections, knocking door to door, causing confusion. So it could backfire, because it could mean that all of the Republicans who are like, well, the election is fraudulent, next time round might not actually vote. And the Democrats are going to double down on their voting. They're going to absolutely make sure that their vote is counted. And this could backfire on Republicans. There's a very big chance that it will. Because there's a lot of increasing number of Republicans who just think that the elections are just like rigged. And so they're like, well, I don't want to take part in that. What's the point? If the election's rigged. Trump actually might have done himself and the GOP a huge disservice with this thoughtless attitude to democracy. Because in order for democracy to work, everyone has to take part. And if Republicans are not going to take part because they've been told that it's unfair, they're going to lose. So rather than it being their plan to get fewer people to vote and therefore fewer Democrats will vote, it'll be the opposite. Democrats are going to vote whatever. I think more Democrats are going to vote than ever before, because traditionally Democrats don't vote that much. So this could backfire big time, you know? And then it'll be more proof that democracy wins. I'm starting to see a little bit of the embers of some light at the end of a tunnel. Genuinely. I was really quite depressed about all of this a couple of weeks ago, and now I'm like, actually, maybe it's going to be okay. Voter registration rolls are generally public information, and door-to-door canvassing is legal and a common practice during political campaigns as candidates and political groups work to register and turn out voters. But the Justice Department earlier this year warned that canvassing can cross the line and violate federal laws aimed at preventing voter intimidation. The warning was directed at Senate Republicans in Arizona who had considered authorizing a voter canvass as part of their controversial re-examination of Trump's loss in Maricopa County. I used to love, when I lived in England, I used to love it when the canvassers would come and knock on my door to ask me about, can we rely on your vote, is what they say in England. Can we rely on your vote? And I can say, only if you've got an hour and a half to talk about it with me. And I would engage them on the doorstep. And I wanted to talk. And I wanted to ask. And I wanted to question. And I wanted to criticize. They never came around ever again. They were like, don't go to that guy's house. You'll half your afternoon will be wasted. I loved voting in England. I loved it. Do you know about the little scam in England that goes on outside the polling places, Carlo? It's normally done by the Conservatives. What they do is they get someone to collect the ballot form. So as you go in and vote, and what you're supposed to do is you take your ballot form with you. This is how we do it in England. You have your little ballot. You take it with you. That's not your actual ballot. It's just your application that you swap for a ballot. They check your identity with your address, and then they give you your ballot. But they don't take the piece of paper away. This is the card. It's called the voter registration card or something. So what happens is some people put their voter card in the trash inside the polling place after they've voted. But the people that come out with it still in their hand, and a lot of people do, invariably they put a canvasser to stand outside, and they're supposed to identify their party. A blue rosette means Conservative in England. It's the opposite to America with the red and the blue. They tend to hide that. I used to see it all the time. They would hide their rosette or their identification and make it look like they were an election official. And they'd say, oh, have you finished with your card? And then they would try and collect it. They'd have a clipboard. And this is like an illegal practice, but they all do it. And what they were doing was they were taking your card so they could see who voted, so that they could, A, create some kind of exit poll, but secondly, they would gather your data to target you to make sure that you're voting Conservative next time around. It's all about building up these lists. And I used to love it. I used to photograph them and film them from a distance and put it on social media and say, look at this secret conservative hiding their rosette and taking these cards off of people as they leave the polling place. Oh yeah, happens all the time. Have you never seen it before? Oh wow, yeah. It's a known tactic in British politics. You put someone outside the polling place who looks official because, traditionally polling places don't have any staff outside. All the staff are inside. Right? So there's always one person standing outside, and invariably it's a conservative tactic. It's very well known. And they do it purposely, but they always try and hide their identification because it's legal as long as they're identified as being from a political party. But they purposely hide their rosette behind their jacket. Every year, well, not every 4 years it happened to me. I can send you photos, Carla. Later, I'll send you photos of the person and the video of the person standing outside the polling place. It's just a little, it's a loophole. They take advantage of a loophole. Yeah. I used to go on and talk about it on the radio in London all the time. I loved exposing these people. And then so I would obviously go up to them and I'd say, "Who are you? What are you doing?" And they say, "Oh, we're just conducting a," and I'd be like, "Well, who do you work for? You work for the Electoral Commission?" And then, of course, they have to explain who they are. And in a couple of cases that I did this, they actually ran away. They ran away. Yeah. They sometimes pretend they're like conducting an exit poll, but they're really not. They're just gathering data. And if they can get those cards off of you, then they can compile a kind of targeted map of who to target next time. It's just a tactic. It's just a loophole. Riyadh has joined us. Welcome, Riyadh, in California. We have Amy, who is watching on her Echo show. Paras, Jerry, Han, Bill, Wiley, Andrea, Landon, Elizabeth, Jeff, Sandy, and Keith as well. Wayne. Wonderful. I mean, and Doug, of course, who's in Ohio. It's almost as if we've become. This is like a little community group. I feel like we're all sitting on chairs in a circle, and I've got the conch right now. I've got the conch. It's that's a William Golding reference. Knock yourself out. It's the 7th of February. This is Backchannel. I'm Anthony Davis. It's 10:30 here on the West Coast, 1:30 Eastern. And hopefully you're having a good Monday and that you had a great weekend and, you're kind of looking forward to getting stuck in this week. Because, I mean, the thing about a brand new week is that you can take it on two ways. You can either feel rested after the weekend. You'll be like, right, yeah, this is going to be a great week. Or you can be like, oh, no, it's Monday. I've never been one of those people. I love a Monday as much as a Sunday. Love it. Very happy with a Monday, me. Let's look at the Ukraine crisis, because this is obviously something that people need to know about, because America is on the brink of war, so we might as well just mention it. Some intercepted communications obtained by the US have revealed some Russian officials have worried that a large-scale invasion of Ukraine would be costlier and more difficult than Russian President Vladimir Putin and other Kremlin leaders realize, according to 4 people familiar with the intelligence. 3 of the sources said those officials include intelligence and military operatives. And, here's why this is interesting, because, people think of Russia as being a very wealthy country, but I don't. I actually think of Russia as being, quite... As struggling in many ways. Putin arguably is the richest man in the world, but he doesn't keep his money in Russia. Putin distributes his money with oligarchs all around the world. This is how he does it. So everyone is indebted to him because he treats these oligarchs like deposit accounts. It's very, very clever the way that, this kind of system, this authoritarian system works. So intercepted communications obtained by the US have revealed that some Russian officials have worried a large-scale invasion could be costlier. The officials have also grumbled about their plans being discovered and exposed publicly by Western nations. There's no evidence that these officials are opposed to the overall plan or would revolt against Putin's orders. Another source familiar with the US intelligence said that Russia has a professional military that will be expected to effectively carry out Putin's orders. Still, Russian defense personnel believe it will be difficult. In the assessments, we see it's clear some people on the Russian defense side are not really understanding what the game plan is. The official added that the assessment suggests the defense personnel think it's a very difficult game plan to stand up. Another of the sources familiar with the intelligence said the way the Russian planning has evolved and expanded over the last 2 months suggests that the concerns have been heard by senior Russian officials. So, I mean, it's so hard to know what is accurate, isn't it? Because, a lot of this stuff is just coming out drip by drip, bit by bit. And, who do you believe? But the intelligence is pretty clear because the British were the first people to go public with this intelligence. Do you remember when they said that Putin was planning on installing a kind of Russian government in Ukraine? Like that was his plan. This came out about 3 weeks ago from British intelligence. They were the first people to leak it. And they leaked it on purpose because they recognized that there was a conspiracy that Putin was planning. And so the British intelligence services said, okay, we're going to go public with this. And then as soon as they did, the Americans then backed it up. Because, of course, they all share the intelligence, But, other people, I mean, the Jake Sullivan, who's the National Security Advisor, he said it could be the biggest military operation in Europe since World War II. He said, we believe that the Russians have put in place the capabilities to mount a significant military operation. He also said any day Russia could take action against Ukraine, or it could be a couple of weeks, with US intelligence officials assessing that Moscow has 70% of its strike force in place for an attack. He said, whatever action Russia takes next, America is ready. And this is what's most interesting about this, I guess. That, I was saying earlier about, this picture on the front of one of the newspapers of these army personnel going from Fort Bragg over to Poland. And it was just like you're being sent to a war that might not happen. You might be like, you just might be on standby now for months. Joe Biden approved the deployment of 2,000 troops from Fort Bragg, North Carolina, to Poland and Germany to bolster forces as Russia moves closer to invading Ukraine. Biden's accused Putin of wanting what he cannot get because he is requesting compromises that the US and NATO are not willing to make as the Russian leader weighs up whether to invade Ukraine. That Putin, one of Putin's major requests is that he never wants Ukraine to join NATO. It's very important to him. It's probably not going to happen, not for a long time. But the point is that it's very interesting to me that Putin is so insistent upon this. This is like his big caveat. I'm not having any more of those pesky NATOs on my doorstep, he's saying. So what do you think? Do you feel unsafe by this? I mean, it's a long way away. It's not anywhere near the mainland. But I mean, do you feel like the US should be involved in this? Because you've got to remember, these are not US forces. This is a NATO event. And when you're part of NATO, this is why only 1,700 US troops have been sent recently. It's because the NATO alliance enables different countries to all face Putin together. He's not fighting America. America is part of NATO. And that, the advantage of that from a diplomatic perspective is that it's not like America is the enemy. It's NATO is the enemy. Or NATO is the peacekeeping force that is seeking to bring an end to any war or violence or persecution or destruction. But it is going to be interesting to see how this plays out. And I mentioned earlier that Emmanuel Macron today, he's probably there now, has gone to see Vladimir Putin to have a little bit of a bit of a chit-chat to see if he can bring this back, pull it around, or even delay it. I mean, that's really his big thing, because, as I was saying earlier, there's elections coming up in various countries that do not want to be at war during elections, especially France. So Emmanuel Macron has kind of got his work cut out now, hasn't he? But it is interesting how, the policy of the United States recently has been to withdraw from all theaters of war, and yet at the same time boast the greatest military in the world and spend more money on the military than anything else. 2/3 of America's national budget is spent on the US military. And yet Trump's theory was, I don't want to be involved in any wars that aren't, necessary. Let's just come out. It doesn't matter about the people of Afghanistan or the people of Yemen or the people of Iraq or the people of Lebanon or anywhere that's seeing, issues right now. America used to be a peacekeeping force for good. They would go in and they would support local military and local leaders, and they would be there to train and educate and bring balance back and bring democracy. And that's what backfired so terribly in Afghanistan, of course, because Western democracy didn't really work in Afghanistan. And now, look, it's controlled by the Taliban again. But that was Trump's plan. That's what he wanted. And Biden saw it through because he didn't want to upset too many Trump supporters. So, he delayed the withdrawal by a few months. I think Trump wanted everybody out by May, and Biden did it in September. And then, of course, they called it a chaotic withdrawal. Do you remember that? Because it looked chaotic. And with the 2 or 3 little bits of film they had of people racing to chase that C-17 that was taxiing, it just looked like a mess. But that's not what the operation was. That was just a moment. The operation was very smooth. And yet the media jumped on the fact that this was a disaster, and yet nobody was there. They got everybody out. Nobody died when they got them out, apart from a few Afghanis who were clinging onto the undercarriage of the aircraft, for goodness sake. And I've always said that I've actually felt that it was, withdrawing an entire army from a military zone is not an easy thing to do. Trump's been talking about, they left all the equipment, they left the tanks, they left everything, and Trump's like, I wanted everything taken, I wanted them to take every last... And of course he's saying that in hindsight, he wouldn't have been able to. They just, especially in May, Biden did it 4 months later and still couldn't take everything. And so now Trump's complaining that the Taliban have got all this US military equipment. And yeah, I agree. It sounds like a disaster, a total disaster. And I don't know why Biden didn't come out and explain why. And maybe if it was a choice between getting humans out safely and leaving equipment, or getting equipment out and losing some humans, I guess that was the choice he had to make. I do wish that Biden was more communicative. I do find him... I think he does himself a disservice by, whenever there's a controversy, I think he should get up. But the problem is he's not a great public speaker. And when he does do a press conference, like he did recently, he talked for 2.5 hours. It was too much. The way that you manage somebody who's not a great public speaker is you do little and often. You don't wait for months and then do a 2.5 hour press conference. You do a press conference every week, but you make it 30 minutes. And people feel informed, and he's not going to ramble. He's just got some very salient points to make, and then, you move on. But you feel like you're involved. And, I mean, it's lucky that Jen Psaki is so good at her job, the press secretary. She's so good at her job. But I do wish that Biden was up there with her. He's busy. I know he's busy. Trump, of course, after having several press secretaries and it being a bit of a disaster, and eventually banned all press conferences. And so what he used to do was talk when he got off the helicopter, purposely with the helicopter still buzzing on the grass so that he couldn't quite hear people and people couldn't quite hear him, and he would use the noise as a reason to mishear people. It was very clever. It's straight out of the authoritarian's playbook. I can't hear you. Very convenient way, and being like en route, going from the helicopter into the White House. That's the only time he would talk to the press, because he was on his way. He didn't want to stop and take questions and be there for any length of time. He was always, and it made him look generous, because he's like, oh, he always talks to the press. It was all planned. All planned. Okay, we don't have long left, so I want to talk about Black History Month, because, of course, this month is Black History Month. And there's lots of people to celebrate and lots of people to talk about. And every day we like to kind of talk about somebody else and educate ourselves. Today it's Sojourner Truth, the African-American evangelist, abolitionist, women's rights activist, and author, who was born into slavery before escaping to freedom in 1826. And after gaining her freedom, Truth preached about abolitionism and equal rights for all. She became known for a speech with the famous refrain, "Ain't I a woman?" Isn't that great? Ain't I a woman? And she was said to have delivered at a women's convention in Ohio in 1851, although accounts of that speech and whether Truth ever used that refrain have since been challenged by historians. Truth continued her crusade throughout her adult life, earning an audience with President Abraham Lincoln and becoming one of the world's best-known human rights crusaders. So we'll talk a bit more about her in just a moment, but it's very interesting, isn't it, that we can go back into history and we can find individuals who just had such a impact on society. And I've always felt that, like, you don't want to get to the end of your life and not have made a difference, even if it's just like going to, I don't know, some retirement home and reading to elderly people for, once a week or something. Just do something so that you can say that you've had an impact, a positive force for good, if your job is not something that is good news, Because I think there's lots of jobs that are, we were talking about teaching earlier, and I was saying that teaching is, I believe, the most important job, the best job. We will always remember our teachers from school, the value of teaching. And yet it's increasingly difficult to be a teacher, certainly in America. And we were discussing why earlier. But I recognize that, not having an impact, it's a little wasteful these days, because there's so many people in need and there's so much opportunity to help. Whether it's just going to do a shopping for an elderly neighbor, but do it regularly, be someone that other people rely on. It's like Christian values, but for all faiths or belief systems. So Sojourner Truth was born Isabella Baumfree in 1797. Wow, 1797. That's like, for America, that's pretty old. She was born to enslaved parents James and Elizabeth Baumfree in Ulster County, New York. At the age of 9, she was sold at an auction to John Neely for $100, along with a flock of sheep. Neely was a cruel and violent master who beat the young girl regularly. She was sold 2 more times by the age of 13 and ultimately ended up at the West Park, New York, home of John Dumont and his second wife, Elizabeth. Around age 18, Isabella fell in love with an enslaved man named Robert from a nearby farm. But the couple was not allowed to marry, since they had separate owners. Instead, Isabella was forced to marry another enslaved man, owned by Dumont, named Thomas. She eventually bore 5 children: James, Diana, Peter, Elizabeth, and Sophia. At the turn of the 19th century, New York started legislating emancipation, but it would take over 2 decades for liberation to come to all enslaved people in the state. In the meantime, Dumont promised Isabella he'd grant her freedom on July 4th, 1826, if she would do well and be faithful. When the date arrived, however, he had a change of heart and refused to let her go. Incensed, Isabella completed what she felt was her obligation to Dumont and then escaped his clutches. Infant daughter in tow, she later said, "I did not run off, for I thought that wicked, but I walked off believing that to be all right. And it must have been a gut-wrenching choice. She left her other children behind because they were still legally bound to Dumont. Isabella made her way to New Paltz, New York, where she and her daughter were taken as free people by Isaac and Maria van Wegenen. And Dumont came to reclaim his property. The Van Wegenens offered to buy Isabella's services from him for $20 until the New York anti-slavery law emancipating all enslaved people took effect in 1827. Dumont agreed. And after the New York anti-slavery law was passed, Dumont illegally sold Isabella's 5-year-old son Peter. With the help of the Van Wegenens, she filed a lawsuit to get him back. Months later, she won her case and regained custody of her son. She was the first black woman to sue a white man in the United States court, and prevail. Isn't that amazing? It makes me very sad to say these words out loud about humans being bought and sold. It is incomprehensible to me that this is a thing. To say these words out loud. And of course, I've been trying to do my due diligence in Black History Month, and I was watching, I must actually recommend it. It was a documentary on National Geographic. I have the name of it here. Let me look at it for you. And it was more about the civil rights movement, race riots, and leading right up to present day. But I tell you something, it was a beautifully made documentary, and it's called The March on Washington: Keepers of the Dream, on Nat Geo. The March on Washington, Keepers of the Dream. And basically it talked about Martin Luther King Jr. and his speech and the original civil rights movement. And then it basically followed the history of the civil rights movement right up until the March on Washington in 2020. And it was very, very moving to hear these stories and to see people talking in this way about this period that we're talking about here, about people like Sojourner Truth and their trailblazing as an evangelist and an abolitionist and a women's rights activist, and being born into slavery and just taking on the white establishment. Apparently the Van Wegenens, I hope I'm saying their name right, had a profound impact on Isabella's spirituality. She became a fervent Christian. In 1829, she moved to New York City with Peter to work as a housekeeper for evangelist preacher Elijah Pearson. She left Pearson 3 years later to work for another preacher, Robert Matthews. When Elijah Pearson died, Isabella and Matthews were accused of poisoning him and of theft, but were eventually acquitted. It says, living among people of faith only emboldened Isabella's devoutness to Christianity and her desire to preach and win converts. In 1843, with what she believed was her religious obligation to go forth and speak the truth, she changed her name to Sojourner Truth and embarked on a journey to preach the gospel and speak out against slavery and oppression. It's so important that we learn these stories of these people and we kind of get to know the individuals who have collectively enabled the freedom, not just emancipation, but the continued freedom of African Americans. But the thing about the Nat Geo documentary that was the most upsetting, really, was people saying that actually nothing has really changed. And while slavery was abolished, it now presents itself in a different way. It has like a different... It's more of a stealth thing, whether it be incarceration, the number of African Americans incarcerated, or slave wages in jobs, and why African Americans are invariably paid less, and how you look at our representation in Congress and how still it's majority white men making decisions about women and African Americans without even considering the level of empathy that's necessary. Correct has joined us. Thank you for joining us. Literally right now, your first time from Florida. Welcome to Backchannel. I'm Anthony Davis. It's 8 minutes before 11 here on the West Coast. It's 8 minutes before 2 Eastern for you. And in a few minutes' time, your pal Hal will be next. He'll be sitting here, just like me, talking probably more about popular culture, movies, computer games, TV shows. We all have like a different thing going on. Oh yeah, he does his top Twitter stories as well. He looks at what's trending on Twitter. And you know, all of the hosts throughout the day, we start the day here in California, certainly in the morning, with looking at the news and the morning papers right across the country and seeing how America is waking up and what they're waking up to, what we're waking up to. Because, you know, the news is so prevalent, prominent, and I try and bring some clarity to what is often kind of weighted news. You know, just focus on the truth. So we've been talking of truth. We've been discussing Sojourner Truth. What a great name to like change your name to. You know, Truth is what a great surname or middle name. You know, it's so great. And we've been looking at her life and her work as we commemorate and celebrate Black History Month. Some of her quotes I was reading earlier, which I think are really interesting. She said, "If the first woman God ever made was strong enough to turn the world upside down all alone, these women together ought to be able to turn it back and get it right side up again. And now they is asking to do it. The men better let them." She also said, "Now, if you want me to get out of the world, you had better get the women voting soon. I shan't go until I can do that." Yeah, the documentary, I was just like looking at the, you know, segregation and just the signs in the windows, you know, the whites only signs in windows, in diners and in stores. And I mean, it's just like, it really wasn't that long ago, you know, it wasn't that long ago. It's when my parents were young. So please spare a thought for Black History Month. We'll continue throughout this week to commemorate and celebrate a great African American and their contribution to the civil rights movement. Thank you for joining me. I'm Anthony Davis. I'll come back tomorrow morning at 9 a.m. here on the West Coast, and we'll do that again. That's noon Eastern. Have a great day, and stay with us for your pal Hal. He's next.